Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to this interview with David Thatcher, who has an extraordinary tale to tell about his involvement in World War II. This interview is being held under the auspices of the Montana Military Museum at Fort Harrison, and this interview is being conducted in conjunction with an exhibit that's being created about the Doolittle Tokyo raid of April 18, 1942. In speaking of the Doolittle raid, 4 of the survivors that are represented by 80 silver goblets that represent each of the crew persons that conducted the raid, of the 4 survivors, 2 of the airmen were from Montana. Hi everyone, I'm Joel Baird, the General Manager of Missoula Community Access Television, inviting you to a special edition of What's Up Missoula. Today we're going to take a history turn. I have in the studio David Thatcher, who was part of a daring and extraordinary story during World War II. David, thank you so much for taking the time to come down here.
You're welcome.
So, can you tell people a little bit about your background, where you were born, and how you got into the military service?
I was born in a log cabin on a homestead near Blue Water Creek at Bridger, Montana, July 31st, 1921. We just lived there a year, then we moved. That was in Carbon County, near Red Lodge. Then we moved to a farm out of Rapalje, Montana, which is in Stillwater County. Lived there for 6 years. I went to first grade there, and then we moved to a farm 7 miles south of Absaroka, Montana, also in Stillwater County. I went through grade school and high school, that location. After high school, then I went to Billings, and my dad had bought a small raw milk dairy in Billings. And so after I finished high school, I delivered milk in Billings for a year and a half until the 2nd of December, 1940. For a year and a half I was there, and I wasn't due for the draft yet because they weren't drafting 19-year-olds a year before the war. I signed up in Billings, and then went to came to Missoula, Fort Missoula, and that's where I was sworn in here.
Oh. And so you signed up. It's not that you were drafted after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941.
No, we had a choice of going in the military, whatever we wanted to then.
Yeah.
I ended up for the U.S. Army Air Corps then, yes.
Oh, and at that time you wanted the Air Corps?
Yes, because I was very interested in airplanes and excited about them ever since I saw my first one.
Right.
Yeah.
And was that on the farm? They're being used for agricultural purposes?
Or? Yeah. We raised a lot of grain on hay and cattle.
Yeah. So did you see yourself as a flyer, a pilot?
No, just possibly a crewman. I did want to fly, but
didn't happen.
No.
Well, let's tell people a little bit about the framing story of what makes your service during World War II a pretty ripping yarn. Can you give people the context of the Doolittle raid and let people who may never have heard about it know what circumstances this raid was undertaken?
Well, after I finished basic training at McCord Field at Tacoma, then I was assigned to the 95th Bomb Squadron of the 17th Bomb Group. And that was the first bomb group in the Army Air Corps to begin training in B-25s, so that all of the Raiders were picked out of that group. They had more training than any other group.
Right, and at this time, the attack on Pearl Harbor had happened.
No, this was December before a year before Pearl Harbor.
Wow, December 1940.
40, yes.
So this was just a sense of preparedness. It wasn't the idea that there was going to be a retaliatory attack.
They were increasing the military then.
As a matter of course, not like, oh, World War II is happening. We need to draft
no.
everyone. There's some questions here that Dave has given me I want to make sure to cover. You mentioned when and why you joined the military, and that was for a love of airplanes.
Yes.
And here's a question. Were you married when you joined?
No, I was not.
You were a young guy then.
Yes, 19, I know.
Yeah. And were there other members of your family? I saw here that there were 9.
Yes,
You had 8 siblings.
no, there was a total of 10. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
4 sisters and 6 brothers.
Yeah. And did your brothers serve in the Second World War as well?
Yes. Brother 4 years older was in the paratroopers. He was in the 101st Airborne Division, and he jumped in France on D-Day, and later he jumped in Holland, and he followed the 101st Airborne Division all the way to Hitler's hideout.
Wow.
Stayed with the group, yeah. Brother 2 years older was in the 2nd division, Army Division in Europe, and he wound up in Czechoslovakia when the war was over. Then the younger brother, 2 years younger, he was in the Army Air Corps too, but he was in Germany in the occupation forces.
And did all your brothers come back from the war?
Yes.
That's pretty amazing, right?
Yes, it is. 2 older brothers were in the Army during peacetime back in the 30s. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is something. My mom is the youngest of 14 kids.
Oh.
And there are 8 boys. No, 10 boys, 4 girls.
Oh.
And of those 10 boys, 8 served and 8 came back.
Yeah.
She thinks of that as a miracle.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you volunteered to join the service. You want to get into airplanes, and
Yes.
you do.
Yes.
You're flying around in a B-25.
Yes.
What was your position on that airplane?
I was the engineer gunner. My position on the raid was at the top turret. I had 250 caliber machine guns in the top turret.
And that was particularly defensive, right?
Yes.
So if attack planes came, you were to thwart them off with your machine
Yes.
gun. I bet you felt pretty exposed up top there.
Well, maybe, but it was I could see everything from up there, bird's eye view of everything.
Right.
Yeah.
And the question is, how did you come to be selected by Colonel Doolittle for this secret mission? And we haven't really explained that yet. And my understanding of the mission was there was a desire to bomb Japan. And it was very far away from U.S. bases.
Yes.
And extremely difficult at that time to get
Yes.
to. And I suppose the motivation was partly psychological, that the U.S., the Allied forces, wanted to show Japan that there was power to infiltrate Japanese homeland and inflict damage.
Yes.
And the resulting casualties are supposed to reduce their will to fight or something like this. Really difficult to undertake, right? The planes just didn't have enough technology to span the difference between the air bases and Japanese airspace. So somebody had to do it.
Yes.
Ended up being you somehow. So how did that come about? How were you selected for this mission?
Well, I was just a mechanic working on the ground, and I wanted to do some flying, so I was able to get on the crew.
So you didn't draw the short straw.
No.
You were pretty eager to go.
But they had to do a lot of training beforehand and figure out the mission ahead of time.
And this was very, very secret, right?
Yes.
The idea was loose
It
lips
was
would
top
sink
secret,
ships.
yeah.
Super top secret. Did you know what the mission was? That you were attempting to do this technologically really risky thing
No.
of flying a plane thousands of miles and trying to return?
No, we were sure we could do it, but
Is that right?
yeah. They had to get the airplane first that would and the B-25 was the only one that would take off from a carrier. And they had to increase the mileage, so they took it originally had a bottom turret in it, but they took that out. It was having a lot of trouble with it mechanically. And besides, we would be flying so low that no fighter could get underneath of us.
Oh, right. So the bottom turret was an extension of the plane, like a glass globe
Yeah.
where a gunner might be there also looking to defend the bomber.
Yes.
And that was removed from the
Removed, yeah.
original design of the B-25.
And a 60-gallon leak-proof tank was put in there where the bottom turret was.
For extra fuel.
Yes, that leak-proof tank has got one that a bullet will go through and it will self-seal.
That's pretty remarkable.
And they also took out nearly all the radio equipment because we had to fly silent.
Right.
And they took out all the oxygen equipment and oxygen bottles because we'd be flying so low that we wouldn't be needing oxygen.
Right. For the aviators out there, can you tell them what your distance from the Earth's surface was?
Well, most of
Altitude?
going, when we were training down at Eglin Field, Florida, we learned to fly right down over the ground, over the water, over the Gulf of Mexico. So that was their training. So, and that we flew about that altitude all the way from taking off from the carrier until we got to Japan.
Wow. And so this is 50 feet, 70 feet,
Yeah.
100 feet above sea level,
Yeah.
literally
Yeah.
above the sea.
Yes.
Wow. How many men went on individual planes on that mission?
There were 16 B-25s, and there were 5 men on each airplane, so total of 80 men on the raid.
Right.
5 in each crew. A
That's-
pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, engineer, gunner, and a navigator.
What title? Like you mentioned engineer a couple of times. Does that mean you were responsible for making repairs if they were necessary?
Well, and just usually at takeoff or landing, I'd keep an eye on the engine instrument, and then if we'd flew to another base, we'd refuel and keep checking on the airplane all the time.
I see. Right. So you were kind of responsible for all the mechanics on the plane to at least alert people losing oil, things like this. When and how did you find out what the mission was? And I assume in your training you were taught some Chinese phrases that might have given you a clue as to where you were going.
No, we didn't get that information until we got on the carrier.
Wow. So that was hours or days before the mission?
We left San Francisco on the 2nd day of April, 1942, and our takeoff day was the 18th of April.
Wow. About 6 months after the attack.
Just 18 days from the time we left San Francisco.
Yeah. I'm thinking of Pearl Harbor.
Oh, yeah.
6 months after Pearl Harbor. Yeah. So what were your feelings like when you were finally told where you were going to go?
Well, they didn't tell us until we got on the carrier exactly where we were going to go.
Yeah. And what was going through your mind when they said you're going to do a bombing raid on Japan?
Well, we had a Navy pilot from Pensacola, which is pretty close to Fort Walton Beach, where the Eglin Field is. He checked out all the pilots to make sure they could get off in 400 feet. They first started, ordinarily it'll take, B-25 would take over 1,000 feet to get off, so they took all the weight out of the airplane they could, just a small amount of gasoline left in it, and then they'd started about 800 feet. They had runway marked off at an auxiliary field at Eglin Field out in the trees where nobody could see what we were doing.
Oh, and the idea was to rehearse taking off from a carrier on a very short runway.
Yes. And when they finally got it down to 400 feet, then they began increasing the load until they were able to get off with a full load of fuel and a full load of bombs.
What allowed that to happen? Was it the skill of the pilot, that the pilot had to learn how to get that huge beast of an aircraft off the ground in 400 feet of runway? Mm-hmm. So the pilot learned. They didn't change the aerodynamics. They didn't.
No,
They said, make it happen.
They locked the brakes and run the engines up to full power, and then release the brakes and practically jump them off there.
Yeah.
And raise the landing gear as soon as they could. They finally pick up speed.
That's pretty amazing. You had to be on board during these practices?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you took off a lot
Yes.
before you finally took off the aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what I had asked you before. And I guess, you don't have to say either. I mean, were you scared when they said you're going to Japan?
Didn't have time to be scared.
Right. It didn't enter into it.
So they trained down there, and then finally flew all the way to Sacramento, and there they changed the propellers on the engines because they'd got a little damage when they training, that low-level training.
Yeah.
And then from Sacramento on the first day of April, we took off and on our way to Alameda Naval Air Station, where they put us aboard the carrier. We were flying low, and we flew under the Oakland Bay Bridge before we landed.
That could raise some eyebrows, too. But that was part of the practice, I guess.
So they had the aircraft carrier, U.S. Hornet, docked there, and we landed and taxied right up beside the aircraft carrier.
Wow.
And then they put 3 big eye bolts in the top of the airplane and used a hoist to hoist them up on that deck of the carrier.
Right.
I had to be in the cockpit to set the brakes when they put it down on the carrier, so I didn't walk aboard the carrier, and I didn't walk off of it either.
Yeah, that's right. Well, here's a question. Do you remember much about the other members of your crew? So there were 4 other members of the crew.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the question says particularly Ted Lawson.
Yes,
I guess you remember him pretty well.
He was the pilot, and the co-pilot was Dean Davenport. The navigator was Charles McClure, and the bombardier was Robert Clever.
Was there something about Ted you remember in particular? I don't know, because it's here. The question is.
He was a good pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a funny question. Do you remember the reason for the name of your plane, the Ruptured Duck?
Well, there was another crew member on the plane, but he was in an auto accident before he could go. But one day he was out there with some chalk and drew a sort of picture of Donald Duck on crutches, and it wasn't long before the other crews named it that, Ruptured Duck.
I see. So, it says, do you remember the engine problem with plane number 15 and how it was fixed? So altogether, there were 16 B-25s making for the Japanese mainland.
Yeah.
And obviously there was a problem with plane number 15.
Yeah, the number 15 was the next to the last one taking off. But they had engine trouble, so the Navy rigged up a hoist on top of on the deck there and removed the propeller first, and then they had to remove the engine and take it down on a hangar deck where they do all their maintenance. And Ed Saylor was able to take it apart and put it together again.
Can you imagine? That's pretty. I mean, these are massive engines.
Yeah, they
Really
are.
big.
And if they hadn't been able to do that, then they would have had to push it overboard.
Well, because if it wasn't going to work, it wasn't going to be carried.
No, and we could not take them down on the hangar deck, so they had to be on the flight deck all the time. And so the carrier's planes could not take off or land with us on deck.
Yeah, sure.
So we had another aircraft carrier escorting us, the USS Enterprise, so they could protect the task force.
Right, because it would be pretty obvious that something was up, right?
Yeah.
16 B-25 sitting on the deck of an aircraft carrier never seen before. And they're obviously bombers, and they're obviously moving in Pacific waters towards the Japanese coast.
Yeah, we left San Francisco about 9 o'clock in the morning, went out under Golden Gate Bridge in broad daylight, so anyone could see that.
Right.
On the carrier.
Somebody could start making surmises, I suppose.
When we left there, we had an escort of 2 cruisers, 4 destroyers, and a refueling tanker, so there's 8 in that small task force.
Right.
Headed west, and just after we got out to sea, then they announced over the loudspeaker that our destination was Japan. So then there was a huge shout went up all over the carrier.
People were pretty excited, you mean?
Yeah.
They were like, okay, I'm ready for it.
And
It
then
wasn't like, oh no.
And then they flashed that news to the other ships in the task force.
So they all knew at that point, leaving San Francisco,
That's what, after we left San Francisco.
what the journey was about.
Yeah.
Wow.
The original plans were if we were within flying distance of Hawaii and met a task force out there, an enemy task force, then we were to take off and fly to Hawaii, or if we were within flying distance of Midway, the same thing. Or if we were within flying distance of Japan, then had to take off. Otherwise, they would have had to push their airplanes overboard so the Enterprise could get its airplanes in the air.
Right, its own defensive planes that
Yeah.
could more easily take off,
Yeah.
and they were more fighter than bomber. And these bomber planes have been modified, as you described, with
Yeah.
the leak-proof tanks and maybe some other things that the government at that time felt was real secret. They wouldn't want the Japanese to know how to do long-range bombing either. They'd be giving away a lot.
They put a leak-proof tank that held more than 100 gallons in the top of the bomb bay, and we still had room for 4 500-pound bombs.
Oh, yeah, there's that part too.
And then, have you ever been in a B-25?
Guess what? I was in a B-17 and a B-29.
Oh, okay.
I flew a B-29 in it.
Oh.
In the lower deck, the front cockpit bubble thing, the gunner, the gunner area, and it was quite something.
Yeah.
We took off from here and flew to Great Falls.
Oh.
Saw the Great China Wall on the way.
Oh, great.
And I was in that looking up, at the flight deck behind me, and I was trying to imagine what it would be like, to be flying in that in combat conditions.
Yeah.
And it seemed pretty scary to me, but I hadn't had much exposure. So the answer is not really. B-29. So I saw the B-17 was much smaller.
Yeah, much better than B-29.
Yeah. So is 25 in between sizes, like shoe sizes, or?
No, it's a medium bomber, just 2 engines, so it's much smaller than the B-17 is.
It is.
Yeah.
And compared to the B-29,
Oh, that's so much bigger than any
the Flying
airplane.
Fortress, right?
Well, the Flying Fortress is a B-17.
Oh, okay.
But then the 13th of April, we met another small task force, and it also had 4 destroyers, 2 cruisers, and a refueling tanker, and a USS Enterprise, another aircraft carrier. So then after the task forces joined, then they headed west towards Japan. And early in the morning, our original plans were to take off in the evening, bomb Japan at night, and fly on to China, hoping to arrive there the next morning after daylight. But we ran into that Japanese patrol boat, and we were afraid that they had notified Japan that there was an enemy task force coming. So we had to take off immediately. I got to get my...
Yeah, no, take some more. Oh, so they had encountered the task force, and the fear was they're onto you, and they'll be alerting Japanese defenses.
We found out later that they did alert Japan that there was a task force out there. But the Japanese were not expecting anything yet, because they knew that no U.S. aircraft off a carrier could fly that far.
Right.
So they weren't prepared to come.
They thought it might have been a naval threat of some sort later on, but they had no idea that B-25s could take off in 400 feet and so on. How far away were you from the Japanese mainland when you took off?
We were supposed to get within 400 miles, but after we run into them, we had to take off immediately. So we were 650 miles, 250 miles farther.
Yeah, than the plan called for.
And we didn't know if we'd make it to China or not without an extra range.
Yeah.
So the day before, they refueled the fleet, and then the two refueling tankers could not keep up with the task force speeding west all night long.
Right.
So they turned back, and I understood that they were escorted by 2 destroyers, and the rest of the destroyers stayed with us. But there was another article just recently come out, or a book come out, and said that just all the destroyers turned back, just the cruisers. And I don't think that's right. I don't know.
Right. Because by this time you were heading towards the target.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
To taking off that far ahead of time.
250 miles
yes,
in any one
it
thought.
really makes a difference.
Yeah, I'll bet.
So Doolittle took off first, and he didn't have any trouble, and then the other plane didn't have any trouble. Then
All 16 took off in the 400 feet off the aircraft carrier without a problem.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did they fly in formation?
No, we did not. After we took off and circled the carrier once, and there's a sailor on board with a big chalkboard, and we were afraid that possibly being on the carrier 18 days near that island had pulled our compasses off. So the sailor with the chalkboard, he wrote exactly our heading of the carrier, so they could correct the compasses on the B-25s. And
To recalibrate the compasses,
Yeah, mm-hmm.
so we felt, okay, this is accurate. And you
Yeah.
had charts to show you where to go, the
Yeah,
target area, and then
Yeah.
retreating to China.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Somebody's going to ask, so I'll just ask it. If they watch this carefully, they'd say, well, what if they were going to China after the mission, why didn't they take off from China?
Not close enough. No airfields are close enough.
Okay. But there was an airfield in China to which you were supposed to go after the bombing raid.
Yes, they're supposed to land at Chuchao. It's in Zhejiang province in China.
Yeah.
But by the time we got to China, then it was dark and raining and out of fuel pretty much there. So 11 crews bailed out.
Yeah.
And
11 of the 16 crews bailed out
yeah,
of their
so,
airplanes.
54 men bailed out in the dark over strange land.
It was land,
Yeah.
though, not water.
Well, there was a couple of them. Number 15 crew did make a good water landing, and Ed Sheeler will tell you about that.
Yeah, the guy that was the great mechanic.
Yeah, mm-hmm. We crash landed on a Japanese occupied island, pretty good sized island off the coast, but there were no Japanese on the island at that time.
Chinese?
Chinese
And they had no love for the Japanese, I bet.
Chinese underground were operating on that island, so they helped us then.
That's pretty fantastic, too. I know we skipped over the question, which was, describe what you did, your targets, the destruction, enemy resistance part.
Well, coming in off the coast, as we came in over the coast, then it was Saturday, right at noon, and the beautiful weather by then. You'll see in the movie that the weather was very rough when we took off.
The movie made about the Doolittle Raider.
Yes, the 30 seconds over Tokyo.
Yeah.
So,
And was that true? It wasn't.
yes.
Oh, it was rough weather?
Yes, it rough weather.
Oh, and
yes.
then it got much better.
Yes, it got better. And we came in over the coast, and a lot of people on the beach, and they waved to us.
They saw it was U.S. and they were okay with that.
Even we were overhead before they could see our insignia on our airplane.
Yeah.
We were flying so low I could see their faces. They were cheering.
Whoa.
Then between there and before we reached to Tokyo, we were what they call head chopping, right down over the ground going in. We met a formation of 6 planes, but we were flying so low, they didn't. I don't think they saw us, and it's very difficult to see an airplane flying right down over the ground. So,
Yeah.
So then when we got to Tokyo, there was quite a bit of anti-aircraft fire by then because there was 6 planes had gone over ahead of us, but And we had to climb then to 1,500 feet so the bombs wouldn't blow us out of the air.
Wow. Yeah. They would still detonate at a low range. It's not like you had to be high for the bombs to drop
No,
and detonate, but
that's
the
pretty,
blowback would destroy the plane.
yeah, that was really pretty low for bombing anyhow, 1,500 feet.
Oh,
though.
yeah.
And then after we left Tokyo, then they just dived down and went out over Tokyo Bay.
Wow. So they really made a show of U.S. force in this respect, too, that the planes were so low that the populace saw the planes, saw the destruction they were capable of.
Yeah. And we didn't go in over the coast at the same time either. We were probably 10 miles distance between some of the planes because we did go in alone. So. And after we left Tokyo Bay, then we dropped down over the water, and we flew within sight of Japan, but out on the water, but we didn't fly overland until we finally reached the southern tip of Japan, and then headed due west to China.
Right. And was the island a planned stop? It wasn't. The fuel was low. You left 250 miles further than you thought. Mm-hmm. But that island, was it a visual idea? Like, oh my gosh, there's an island? Or was it on a chart? It was like Plan D or something?
What, the island we
the one you
crashed on?
Yeah.
No, we just was hoping to reach China anyhow, and so.
Yeah.
And most of the 11 of them had a cruise bailed out because they run out of fuel.
And what was the survival rate among those 11 when the cruise bailed out?
All of them that had to bail out, they survived the bailout.
All 54?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's a kind of miracle.
The engineer gunner on crew number 3 was in the back of the plane by himself, and the signal was given to bail out, but they don't know what happened to him. His body was found with the plane.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because there was some grim outcome. I mean, I read this briefly, that some of the pilots or crew were captured. 3 were executed by the Japanese.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So it's happened. Mm-hmm. When they crashed on the island, and the other 4 of the crew were thrown out through the nose of the airplane, and I was in the back end, and I was unconscious for a while, and then kind of came to and tried to get out what I thought was the bottom of the airplane, and finally realized we were upside down.
Right.
And,
it must have been a shock.
Plexiglass on its turret had shattered, and that's where the water was coming in. So I was able to go to the back of the airplane where the bottom escape hatch is, and opened that and crawled out on the plane. Yeah.
The other 4 were ejected from the plane, but they had injuries. They survived.
Oh yes, they were all injured so bad that they couldn't walk the next day. They had to be carried. I went out about 3 o'clock in the morning with a lantern and a couple of Chinese, and to see if I could get the first aid kits out of the airplane. Yeah. But the tide had come in then, and it was underwater. So then about daylight it went out again, and by then the tide had gone out, and then that both engines were torn out with the propeller still attached. They were quite a ways from the airplane. And then I could see how much damage had been done. The whole front of the airplane, pilot and bombardier and navigator compartment, were smashed flat back against the leading edge of the left wing. Wow. So we must have hit the bottom when we turned over to do that much damage.
Yeah.
What and if they hadn't been thrown out, they'd have never got out alive.
Yeah. And in pretty primitive conditions. There's not a hospital on the island.
No medical help, whatever, nothing.
Yeah.
Really.
Any Chinese medicine?
And they that night, then they finally helped us up to a house there and stayed overnight. And the pilot had a deep gash in his left leg and a gash in his left arm. Most of his teeth were knocked out. Wow. The co-pilot had a gash in his right leg, and the navigator was leaning between the pilot and co-pilot's armor-plated seats and had his shoulders up against them, so he dislocated both shoulders.
Yeah.
And the bombardier must have went out through the plexiglass nose with, he had blood running off his top of his head. And you can see the imprints of the bracing of the plexiglass on the top of his head.
Oh my gosh.
There.
So people are in some really severe pain
Yeah.
too.
No medical help, whatever.
But the people on the island considered you guys somewhat exotic and somewhat heroic too.
When I got back to the house where the other guys were at, and after I'd been out there in the morning, there was a leader on the island. His name was Charlie, I guess that's what they called him.
Oh.
And he had organized some stretchers, bamboo pallets to carry the guys on. They put 4 ropes up from different sides so they wouldn't tip. Then they fastened the rope over a bamboo pole so that 2 coolies could carry them on their shoulders.
And they had a destination in mind, like a better place to be.
To get out of there, yeah. Because then we left there at about 11 o'clock in the morning, that spot, and started across the island, and the Japanese landed a company of soldiers right at that spot then 4 hours after we left.
Wow. Do you think they spotted the wreckage?
Well, they knew about the raid and must have knew there's something, yeah. Anyhow, we were cut away the head of them, so they never caught up to us.
That's great. Talk about luck again.
Yeah. It took us all that day and the next night to get across the island, so it was a pretty good size. So once we were going along, that afternoon, first afternoon, we were going along a levee, and off to our right was a small bay there, and all of a sudden they practically dumped the guys over the bank and away from the water, and there was a Japanese patrol boat going through the harbor, but it didn't stop. It just kept on going. Finally, when it got out away from the harbor, then we got back up on the levee and started on our journey through there.
Yeah. How did you eventually escape then?
They had a sampan there that they took us to the mainland on. That was second day after our crisis. They got us to mainland, and the city of a small city, Haiu, on the beach, on the coast, and we were able to get to there, and stayed there that second night, and then the next day. In the meantime, Dr. Cheng had traveled from the hospital at Lin Hai for about 25 miles by sedan to Haiu, and then the next day we traveled that distance to the hospital. Finally got there, I was riding in a sedan chair most of the time, and they were being carried. And some of them were able to get in a sedan chair, be able to stand the pain.
Yeah, that's a lot of jostling and
yes.
so on too.
The coolies, when they carried you, that bamboo pole would give, so they just have bouncing along like that all the time.
You were in pain. That must have been a terrible rhythm.
Yeah.
That's a pretty amazing story, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's pretty amazing. Now, the Japanese, for instance, knew you guys had to be somewhere. They saw the wreckage. You're not on the island. They conclude the Chinese are collaborators.
Yeah.
What happens then?
Then at the hospital, then we were there. That was the first time I got an interpreter. All the other time I had to do sign language.
Sure.
And then we were there 3 days, and then the crew number 15, the one with that had made a good water landing. Yeah. And they caught up to us there.
Wow, small world.
And they had crashed on made a water landing near another island and on that crew was a doctor that had taken gunnery training so he could go along with a gunner. So,
this is pretty lucky as well.
Yeah,
so you have a U.S. doctor that you reunited
Doc
with.
White, yeah. Mm-hmm. So then the co-pilot on the number 15 crew had type of blood that Ted Lawson had. So the Doc White was able to give him a couple of blood transfusions because he was in pretty bad shape by then. And so we stayed there 3 days after they arrived, and then I was of no more use to my crew there, so I went on, worked our way inland with four of that crew, and Doc White stayed there.
Oh, I see. So
And
you guys are in China. You don't know the language.
No.
And you're taking off to get back home.
Yeah. Well, they had a pretty good interpreter after that. They could understand what they're doing. And after I left, Lawson kept getting worse and worse, and the 3 days with no medical help, infection had set in his leg. So Doc White then there at the hospital with Dr. Chan, and his father was a doctor there that owned that hospital, so they had to amputate his leg there. And Doc White had really a rough time to have to take care of the four of them. Finally, the others were able to get around pretty good.
And they weren't detected by the Japanese during their recovery either.
No, but they were advancing anyhow coming in from the coast, and that's why the other crew, 4 guys and I, left because they were advancing all the time, and chance of being captured. So
yeah.
And the Chinese had been fighting Japan for 4 years, and they blew up all the roads, all the highways along the coast to slow the advance of the Japanese. So all we had was trails through the rice paddies to travel by walking and sedans here and working our way inland. Finally, after quite a few days, we finally reached a place where there was the trail was wide enough. We rode in a rickshaw all one morning, and then finally got to a place where I looked across a small canyon there, or a draw, and there were some automobiles waiting for us.
Wow, that must have seemed like the height of luxury,
Yes.
right?
And we traveled by boat and walking and train, and before we finally reached a big city on the Yangtze River, Hanyang. And there we waited for an airplane to come in from Chongqing to pick us up. Every morning at breakfast, the air raid alarm went off, and we would walk down to the dock and get on a tug, and then go up the river a couple miles. They'd let us get out on shore there. The water was pretty deep right there, so he'd get up next to the shore, and there was about a 6-story pagoda on a hill there, and those 3 days we'd climb up there and look around. We'd see pretty good from up there. Yeah. And then the Japanese would come over and bomb the airfield at Hanyang and the city, and we could hear the bombs going off from that distance. And then after they dropped their bombs, they'd go over machine gunning. And just nothing in particular, just emptied the machine guns out of the city.
Right.
And by evening, the Chinese laborers had filled up bomb craters on the airport and tamped them down, ready for airplane to land.
Right.
Well, the fourth morning...
This is a grim ritual.
Yeah. The fourth morning, then, the airplane did come in and picked us up, took us to Chongqing. Well, that day, the Japanese come over and bombed and strafed that pagoda. They had spies through there. Oh. They knew what we'd been doing. Yeah.
Wow. So eventually a plane comes that you can get on.
Yeah. Mm. Twin-engine cargo plane, the C-47.
Oh, US C-47?
Yes. Sure.
Wow.
There were, the AVG was the American Volunteer Group, was operating in China then. So. Yeah.
And did that plane finally take you to a major city?
Well, I don't know if it was the same plane. It probably was, anyhow. And at Chongqing, then Madame Chiang Kai-shek had a banquet for us, and we got to meet the Generalissimo. He couldn't understand English, but she, the then presented us each with a Chinese medal, and she could speak good American language because she went to school here in the United States. She knew all the slang.
That must have been so funny. You really went from rags to riches over the course of several. Was it several weeks then, from the forced landing on the island to the dinner with Madame?
No, it took us a full month across all that part of China.
That is a pretty amazing adventure. I mean, were you, I don't know, at the time thinking, this is a long way from Montana?
Yeah.
You were doing all that?
Yeah. And then we were there about 3 days in Chongqing, I think, and then flew over to Calcutta. We had to stop at Kunming to refuel before going over the Himalayas. And the AVG, the American Volunteer Group, they had their shark-nosed P-40s there fighting the Chinese.
Oh, yeah. Those fighters.
Japanese, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That must have been a sight to see, too, for the airmen long way from home.
Yeah, and then flying over the hump, we no oxygen available on the plane except for the pilot and co-pilot. We had to fly at 17,000 for 4 hours. So we just
get a little lightheaded and cold.
Just sit there deep breathing all the time.
Yeah, that's like a Mount Everest journey.
Yeah. Then we got to India, and it was a dry season and dusty, hazy, and we couldn't find the airport, so we landed in a big plowed field. That C-47 is a pretty rugged airplane.
Yeah.
So
must have amazed a few farmers.
From every direction, the Indians came out, running out there from the hedgerows, wondering what was the matter.
I'm sure.
Finally, the old Indian could understand us, and he pointed away to Chongqing, so I took off and then landed at the airport at Calcutta.
Wow. Getting a little closer to home, getting a little further away from home.
Yeah.
And were you still with your crew? Or no, those guys are left back to Kiel.
I was with the other crew and then there was about, I think, probably a dozen of us at least that had gathered at Chongqing, because the guys didn't land at the same place. They pretty much scattered all over Zhejiang province. It took some of them several days to finally get to where they could move inland.
Yeah.
And then there at Calcutta, I was there the last 10 days of May in 1942, waiting for orders. And then we went to New Delhi and was there about 3 days. We went by train from Calcutta to New Delhi. And then we flew to Karachi, which was still in India then. It's Pakistan now. And then there I got my orders to return to the U.S.
But you're glad to see those orders.
Yes. So we took off and stayed the first night at Basra, Iraq, and then the next night at Cairo, and flying in a C-47 cargo plane that called the Laguni Birds.
So you weren't exactly precious cargo. They're going to take you along anyway.
No. They flew ingots of tungsten all the way out of China, and they had them lashed down to the floor so they wouldn't move. And that had priority over passengers.
Sure.
That was so
that was a precious
vital in the manufacture of steel.
Yeah.
So then the next night, we flew, by then French North Africa, France had surrendered, so that was all in German-controlled Northwest Africa. So I had to fly south to Khartoum in the Sudan, over there overnight. And then the next day we flew to Kano, Nigeria, and refueled and onto Lagos, Nigeria, on the coast.
Yeah.
There overnight. And next day we flew, there we boarded a Pan American Clipper, 4-engine flying boat, to Liberia, and then overnight we flew from Africa to South America, Natal, Brazil, overnight at Belém, Brazil, and then north to the next day to Trinidad, refueled to San Juan, Puerto Rico.
Let's say you took the long way.
All the way around the world, yeah.
Yeah.
Out of San Juan, we run into into a downdraft, and nobody was fastened down to their seatbelt, so we hit the ceiling, and then when they come out of that, it hit the floor. One guy suffered a couple of broken ribs.
They always tell you wear your seatbelt on the airline, you know, even when the sign is off.
They always had bench seats along each side of the airplane, and then it's seatbelts on there.
Sounds uncomfortable anyway.
Yeah.
You want to take them off.
And we stayed overnight in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The next day, made it to Miami, and overnight there, and then the next day to Washington, D.C.
For a little recognition, I should hope?
Yes, I met quite a few more of the crew then, and General Doolittle was there by then, and met him, and then on a Saturday, I think it was about probably 20 of us were lined up there at the airport at Bowling Field, and we presented. They presented us a Distinguished Flying Cross there at the.
Yeah, were you pretty excited at that point?
Yeah, pretty well.
Yeah. And what about your family? Did they know about your journey? Like that, at some point they knew, okay, he made it through, or did they have to wait to read about it in the funny papers?
No, Doolittle got back to the United States in about a month after he bailed out of there, and he wrote a letter to all our parents or spouses or family, let them know that we were okay.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
But it took a month.
That's for him to finally get out of there.
So as far as your people knew, you were on a special secret mission, and
I
I'll call you when I call you.
don't think they knew I was out of the United States. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was such a top secret that they didn't release the information of where we took off from or landed to the public for 1 year after the raid. So it was still top secret then.
This was, so you're back in 1942, in May or June?
June, come back in June, yeah.
Yeah. You get a hero's welcome. This is pretty good.
Yeah.
Accommodations get better, like you're in a sedan chair, and then you're moving up to an auto, and then you're C-47, you're moving up to the Clipper.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did you want to go back in? Were you like ready for more fighting? You're like, okay, thanks, that was a great ride. I think I'll go back to some dairy farming.
Stayed in the service. Yeah, I had to be in the service then.
Yeah.
And then I flew. Ed and I, he was with the crew there too, and we flew back to. Well, he had to get off at Bismarck and go the rest of the way by bus because Jordan is east of Billings Airport, so and I flew into Billings and.
So you're pretty close to home.
Folks, yeah.
I bet they're glad to see you and hear this story.
Yeah, well, I couldn't tell them anything about it.
Oh, you couldn't at that time either?
No, just that I'd been over Japan. I could tell the public what happened over Japan, that was all.
Yeah, none of the particulars.
No, nothing until that. The news was released a year later. Yeah, that's
Interesting, because this was really done to have a psychological impact on Japan, not necessarily the United States. That bombing planes had reached Japanese airspace.
It boosted the morale of the Allies then, and it did the opposite to Japan.
Yeah, that's what it was supposed to do. Big cost of war. Well, we mentioned the Distinguished Flying Cross.
Yes.
And that's what you received in June 1942.
Yeah, all the Raiders received that.
How many were there for that ceremony of the 90?
And Washington?
Yeah.
Probably maybe 15. I don't know. We're all lined up in there. There's pictures of us all lined up, and I was the lowest ranking. I'd been on a corporal.
Oh yeah.
I was clear at the end of the line when Hap Arnold, the commanding general of the Air Force, presented me with a medal.
Yeah.
And Doolittle was there right at that time too. So there was 3 enlisted men, and the rest were officers of the.
Oh, I see.
The crews were made up probably about 20 to 25 maybe to enlisted men. The rest were officers or something like that.
Oh yeah. And you're at the bottom of the list. Let's hope. Did they give you a promotion after all that?
Yes, they did, to sergeant.
Okay.
I was a corporal on our raid.
Yeah.
There was 2 other fellows that were killed on the raid, the airplane that took off before we did, they made a very rough water landing, and the engineer, gunner, and the bombardier were seriously injured. Their bodies were washed up on shore the next day, and the other 3 of that crew were captured by the Japanese. And then crew number 16, the last one off the carrier, they flew inland quite a ways, but they landed near, I can't remember the name of the city now, but so that crew was captured too.
Right, and some of these crew members were executed.
Yes,
3. I read that, and I was like,
yeah, so they took 8 prisoners, and 3 of them were executed. They were all flown to Tokyo and tried there with no interpreter, and they were all sentenced to life in prison. And then they were flown back to China, and 6 months after the raid, 2 pilots and the engineer gunner that were captured were executed, and the co-pilot on crew number 6 died in prison from malnutrition. So there was 4 lived through the war then.
And 4 were eventually liberated after?
Yeah, they were all just walking skeletons, and they were liberated from there.
Yeah. Oh, the Silver Star. Do you want to talk about that award and decoration a little?
I guess I was presented that for helping my crew, save them. Yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Because if I hadn't been there to help them, I'm sure we'd have been captured.
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of responsibility. It sounds like you were the most able-bodied.
Yes, I was the only one that wasn't hurt. I was able to walk, so.
Yeah. Yeah, you had to do it.
Yeah.
Have you ever written anything about your experience? And then it says Chapter 13, Carol Glein's book. So I guess the answer is yes. You have written about your experience.
No, I haven't, but there's been lots of interviews on it and everything.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because you know the story so well. I know that you lived it, but, I've lived some stories I can't remember a darn thing about. It just happens that way. So, in particular, in this book, Carol Glein's book,
Yeah.
there is an interview that you had given about your experience.
Yes.
There's a question.
In the book, yeah.
No.
And then,
You think it's all right to pass? Okay. Okay, there's a question. It says, later military service. You were discharged in July 1945.
yeah.
Did you ever consider staying in the military after
No,
your adventure?
I didn't like traveling.
Well, you certainly had quite a bit.
Then, I don't know, you want the rest of it, the
Yes,
story?
sir. I don't see why not.
After going home to Billings for a couple of weeks of vacation, then I reported to MacDill Field at Tampa, Florida, and went into B-26s there. That's a twin-engine bomber with a single tail. After training there until last of September '42, then I went by train with the ground crew to New York and boarded the Queen Mary.
Oh, wow.
And went across the North Atlantic on that. It did not go on a convoy, it went alone.
Yeah.
And it would change course every 3 miles, turn 90 degrees, just zigzagging across the
Trying
North
to throw
Atlantic.
off
A submarine
submarines.
couldn't lay and wait for it, and I couldn't keep up with it. So.
Yeah.
There were 1,200 troops on board that trip. They had bunk beds stacked 5 high.
I was going to say you went over in style, but apparently not. They didn't bring out the China plate for you guys on that journey.
Off the coast of Ireland, a dozen U.S. and British destroyers met us to escort us into Glasgow, Scotland. Well, this, about 9 o'clock in the morning, this one destroyer cut across in front of the Queen Mary, twice looking for submarines, and the third time he didn't make it. The Queen Mary cut it in 2.
No kidding.
You could just feel a bump when it hit the destroyer. That Queen Mary is so big.
Yeah.
So they finally escorted us into Glasgow. Then most of the crew were killed on the destroyer. And so we landed in, disembarked at Glasgow, Scotland, and then went by train down to Norwich, England. It's southeast of London. We were in the air base there, but we didn't have any airplanes there yet. So at night, the German bombers would come over our base on their way to London, but they didn't bother us.
Great. Oh, gosh.
Then I contacted malaria. Got it in England. I was in
England? Wow.
a civilian hospital for a couple of weeks there. Well, I'd picked it up somewhere along the way.
I would think.
Got bit by a mosquito.
Right.
So then, while I was in the hospital, then my outfit shipped out. So I was attached to an engineer outfit then and went on a convoy to North Africa in last of December of 42.
Yeah.
And we were at landed in Oran, Algeria, and then we went to a place in western Algeria, French Army base, Air Force base there, called Tafaroui. And we were there for a while, and our airplanes finally arrived, and we were, it was so much mud over there then that they had to lay down steel mats for the airplanes to take off from and land.
To get any traction.
Well, yeah, so they wouldn't sink in the mud.
Right.
And a couple times the airplane would get off the mat and just sink down to its axle in the mud.
Gosh, that sounds like a pretty bad airport. It was the rainy season, I guess.
Yes, it was then. Mm-hmm.
So after this adventure, you're still flying, or you're?
Yes, I'm still in my crew. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we went to airdrome at Oran, and there we were still in the mud, but they had runways there. So.
Yeah.
And up until middle of April, we were with the airplanes. We were flying submarine patrol back and forth across the Mediterranean between Algeria and the coast of Spain. And then in middle of April, we moved up to the front, and there we were bombing the Italians and the Germans in Tunisia and islands of Sicily and Sardinia, and then we moved farther up to the front into Tunisia after the Germans were kicked out of North Africa, and we could reach the southern half of Italy from there.
Right.
I was on the first bombing raid on Rome, 19th of June, 43, and there were 600 airplanes over the city that day.
Wow.
We were bombing the airfields around it, but it was hitting the railroad bridges and the highway bridges and the highways, and especially the railroad yards. Most of the railroads in Italy run through Rome, so that they were really concentrated there.
All roads lead to Rome.
Yeah. Yeah. I was on 26 bombing missions over there.
Wow.
Then in about probably last of September, I got yellow jaundice, and I was in the hospital over there, big tent city, for 2.5 months with that. And finally, after I got out about the 1st of December, then my outfit had moved up to the island of Sardinia. I was only there about a month, and I didn't do any more flying there, so I finally come back to the United States. So flew the Baird all the way back to Casablanca.
Oh my gosh, that movie fame.
Yeah, for about 3 days, and then boarded the Empress of Japan. It was a Japanese liner that had been captured by the Allies early in the war and converted to a troop ship.
Wow.
And come back to New York on that.
That's pretty amazing. What year was that? 43 by this time?
Yes, that was, arrived back in the United States early January 44 then.
Oh yeah. And you had done, I can't even calculate the number of miles that you must have traversed in that brief span of time. Thousands and thousands of miles.
It's 25,000 around the world.
Was the world as big as you thought it would be? It's pretty perspective.
Pretty good sign.
And then this is 44, January 44.
Yes, I was in
There's
over
18 months left in the war.
And I was over there all of 1943.
Yeah.
North Africa. Yeah.
Mediterranean area
Yeah.
and so on. And were you reassigned then from January 44?
Yes, I come home on leave and then went to Marchfield, California. And that was had R&R there for a week or so, and the studio was just finishing the movie then, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo.
Okay.
So I got to go to MGM studio and met all the crew that was on in the movies,
Oh my gosh.
and Dean Davenport, the co-pilot on our plane, was a technical advisor for the movie, so it was quite accurate.
Yeah. That's pretty good. You're like 23 years old and you're already a historical figure.
And I just, yeah. And then after they had the movie, I was still stationed down there, so I got to see the world premiere showing of it at Grumman's Chinese Theater. All the crew was there. And
What did you think when you saw the film? Like, did you say, oh, that is pretty accurate, or that's what
yeah,
happened?
well, if they were still had a B-25 in one of their studios down there, and they started it up in the studio, made a terrific noise. I guess. And they had it running and everything then.
This was also, I guess, here the veils of secrecy are lifted off. It's being made into a major Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
Maybe the intention too is to buck up the U.S. resolve for the Pacific theater. You know, because Europe seems to be crumbling at this time. You know, the D-Day seems like, well, that's going to happen. A lot of people said the fighting in the Pacific was long and extremely brutal. A lot of people that say, oh, the U.S. is the first country to detonate an atomic device said they couldn't imagine what would have happened had there been an invasion, a land invasion of Japan would result in millions of deaths.
They weren't ready to give up. They would have fought the
tooth and nail kind of a thing. Maybe the function of 30 Seconds Over Tokyo was to help the U.S. resolve, I don't know, you know, and say, we've got to see this thing to the end or something. So what happens after your
I was at
movie
Marshfield until I was flying in B-24s then. They were moved out to Blythe, California, and pretty hot in August there.
Yeah.
July, June.
But you're stateside, closer to
the rest
your
of,
family.
The rest of the war, yes.
In a little more secure position.
Yes.
Do you think they felt, well, God, this guy's done enough?
No, there was a lot of war yet to fight.
Yeah. So they didn't say, let's give him a little easier position.
No, not. There was about, let's see, at least 20 of the raiders were in 4 different bomb groups, medium bomb groups in North Africa. I think a 7 is probably in our group.
Yeah.
Of those, well, let's see, Davy Jones was in, he was shot down, and I think it was December '42 over there, so he was a prisoner. And let's see who else. Tom Griffin was, he was one of the survivors up until last year, 12, and he was shot down over there, and I think the 4th of July probably.
In 42.
In 42, yeah.
No special treatment, it sounds like. Like you guys went on this amazing adventure, and they're like, well, okay, get back to work.
Yeah. And then Griffiolia was the co-pilot on crew number 15, was shot down over there too. And Ross Greening, he was pilot on the raid. He was shot down over there too.
Oh, yeah.
4 former became prisoners of the Germans.
After the war, did you guys get together quite a bit, or you know, say let's Doolittle Raiders get together because it's
yes, they had reunions every year except 2 years since World War II.
That's a lot of reunions.
It is, yeah.
I'm doing the math. It's not 60 yet, but it's like 59 reunions. Is that something like that?
Well, they went by anniversary of the raid. So,
yeah. Oh, we're back in 42.
Yeah.
71 times.
I think Doolittle, pretty sure in December '45 he put on the first one in Miami Beach. So, and then they did. I don't think had one in '46, so it was too close. Then they started in '47, I think.
Yeah. Did you go to a lot of them?
I went to more than 40 of them through the years.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And after a while, then they had the wives come too. So my wife went over more than 30 of them, I guess, over the years.
Did she? Did she get bored? Did she say, oh, or she enjoyed them?
Oh, yeah.
She didn't want to hear the story again. She's like, oh, don't let him tell that story again. What else?
Ask about the silver goblets.
Oh, the silver goblets. What are they?
Well, they are, the city of Tucson presented the Raiders with silver goblets in the reunion there in that year. They're, probably that high, I think, and then our names are on them right side up and upside down.
Huh. Oh, so you can drink enough to turn.
During the year, if a Raider has passed away, then they have a toast to all the Raiders. They read the names of all the 80 men of every reunion, and the ones that died in the previous year, they turned their goblet upside down, and they got a case for it there. And it used to be at the Air Force Academy at Colorado Springs until a few years ago. Now they're permanently at the Air Force Museum in Dayton, Ohio. So there's still 4 right side up.
Right. And you are among that number.
Yes.
Congratulations. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Are you getting tired? Is there any more
No.
Is there something I didn't ask you, in this talk that you want to comment on?
Well, we had 5 children. Girl, boy, girl, boy, girl. Our oldest son was a medevac helicopter pilot in Vietnam. Do you know what that is?
I'm imagining
they evacuate the wounded.
Yeah.
He didn't want to do any killing.
Yeah.
We had to take further training to be a medevac pilot, and he was killed there in February the 6th, 1970.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Made a big sacrifice, too.
Yeah.
Was he your eldest boy?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And we had the other 5 children. Oldest daughter, she lived in Little Rock for 40 years. She was head of I think it's medical, not biology, but they're at the hospital in North Little Rock, supervisor there, medical technician or something, I think it's.
Okay.
She's. Then they moved back here to Missoula, her and her husband, in 2010, and they bought the house next door.
Oh, to you?
To take care of us, yeah.
Oh, that's really sweet.
And she wanted to do part-time work at the hospital, so she started working at St. Pat's Hospital.
Yeah.
Now she's a supervisor in the department.
Oh, that's great.
Our middle daughter lives in Jamestown, North Dakota now.
Yeah.
So, and
There's a lot of flooding there some years back, didn't there?
She's married and has one daughter. Her oldest daughter adopted 2 children. And then her son, he's lived in Little Rock too. We lived down there since '79, I guess. He's married and has a daughter and a son. Then her youngest daughter went to Dartmouth College and then come back here and went through law school. She was a attorney here in Missoula. And she died in June of 2010, 2009, but they had a brain tumor and was operated onto that. And she, her and her husband have 2 children, and the granddaughter was 11, and boy was 14 when she died. So.
Yeah. That's right.
About the family, well, I still have a younger brother and 2 younger sisters living out of
You do of the 10?
Of the 10. They all grew to adult age and got married, and so.
Yeah.
So they survived pretty well.
Yeah. Do your brothers have stories from the war too?
Well, the paratrooper didn't talk about it.
Didn't talk about it. Yeah.
He was at Bastogne on Christmas of 1944 when they were surrounded by the Germans. Probably being that had fixed bayonets, I imagine there. So
there's stuff you don't want to talk about. I don't know if you know the Trotters, Marilyn and
No,
the dad. My friend Hank Trotter, his dad was in Easy Company, and he was in the parachuter. He said, Hank just posted something about his dad, and he said, well, my dad joined the parachuters because they offered more money. He was sorry. Because he parachuted behind enemy lines. And, at his dad's memorial service, I saw a book open, going on about what a war hero he was and the conditions he went through and so on. And I was really surprised. Sherwood, that was his name. And I always see him like, oh, there's Mr. Trotter. Didn't realize this guy parachuted behind enemy lines, had to kill 9 people with a knife and so on. It's pretty wild. Like, you got these stories, and here you are. Everything's super normal now, isn't it?